All right, we are now streaming. All good? All right. So let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this academic and conversation series with the Accepted Society and Accepted Consulting team. My name is Kaelyn Grace Apple. I am the founder of Accepted Consulting, and I am joined here today by Miss Danielle Lawson, as well as Katie Ibsen, who is joining in from Berkeley. Today, we're going to be talking about the return to campus, any anxieties or excitements over returning, and some helpful tips on returning to the campus after, well, still during a pandemic.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to you, so that way you can kind of get into the next bit.
All right. So I'll go ahead and just quickly introduce myself for anyone who doesn't know me. Like Kaelyn mentioned, my name is Dr. Danielle Lawson. I'm an assistant professor at Penn State University, and I'm also the co-founder of Accepted Society, and I work at Accepted Consulting as the head of postdoctoral development, as well as a graduate admissions consultant for interdisciplinary sciences and general grad admissions. Katie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. My name is Katie. I'm currently an undergraduate student at UC Berkeley. I'm a rising senior. I study anthropology and archaeology, and at Accepted, I'm the lead transfer consultant. So if anybody has questions or consultation needs in terms of transferring from community college to a four-year university, that's me.
Excellent, great. All right, so just kind of jumping in, Kaelyn and I were talking a little bit, and then I know Katie, you and Kaelyn were talking a little bit, and we decided to do this topic because we were all talking about the fact that in theory, we're all supposed to be returning to campus this fall. It's August 1st. It's like the Sunday of the summer is what I call it. We know that the academic year is starting, and we were all talking about the fact that we're now in this place that we have to transition ourselves into going back to campus. So I thought we could all share our experiences here for just a few minutes, very raw, very real. So that way we kind of know, just sharing how we feel and then talking through our feelings, and then some tips that we have if anyone out there is feeling the same way. So just kind of jumping in with my own experience this past year. So I started my professor position in August 2020, sort of the height of the pandemic. I had been a postdoc before in North Carolina, and then I moved to Pennsylvania. I didn't really end my postdoc because it just kind of didn't feel real because everything had stopped and I was doing nothing is what it felt like all the time. Yeah. Moved to a new place and then got thrown into this role of being an assistant professor. And I was working from home. Penn State took it very seriously, which I am so grateful for. And I was not even working on campus, like to the point that I made a YouTube video the other day about setting up my office for the first time and getting to work in it for the first time. So my experience has definitely not been an on-campus experience this past year. And I find myself in this place of very mixed emotions. I'm so excited to be back on a university campus. There's just something about the energy of a campus, the routine of going back to a campus, the productivity associated with being on a campus, the community on a campus. But I'm also simultaneously terrified. We have a pandemic that's going on, and I would be remiss to not mention that I'm just worried about it, even though I'm fully vaccinated. But I'm also just nervous about being thrust into the environment. As much as I'm excited for it, it's a completely new setting for me compared to what I knew. And I'm in a new role. And I made the joke recently, I think I was talking to you, Kaelyn, that I felt like my first year was kind of a fake year because I was working at home. And even though I was doing the dang thing every single day, and I have students that I'm mentoring and that sort of thing, it didn't really feel like I was truly an assistant professor yet. I was excited to change and to move somewhere new after being stuck in the same place during quarantine for what felt like years, even though it was just a few months. But there's just this feeling of really struggling. I don't know people. I haven't had those really rich informal conversations on like how to do anything on campus, really. And I really, as much as I enjoy my job, I was miserable working from home. I don't work well from home. It's just this cluster of emotions in my head. And we wanted to make sure that we could all share our experiences because we have a feeling there are multiple people out there too. Kaelyn, do you mind sharing your experience?
Yeah. So the pandemic started when I was at Oxford. So I went home and finished my dissertation from my grandparents' house. And so I was really looking forward to the transition of being in New Haven. And even though I was very, very well aware that fall semester was likely going to be online, I kind of had a feeling about that during the summer. I wasn't quite expecting spring to also be online. And the fall semester, I was able to maintain my momentum. And I felt like being in a new space, being in my own apartment, I was able to kind of figure out a system that worked for me. But by spring semester, I have never felt more burnt out. I felt alone, very depressed being alone in my apartment. And then also I just didn't feel like I was able to get out of my classes what I normally would. I wasn't producing the type of work that I was used to. And so my own experience with that, like I feel like I need to be on campus. And so it's frustrating at the moment because if we had this conversation a week ago, I think I would have felt a lot more at ease and optimistic about going back to campus. Yeah. And at the moment, I keep saying it feels like March 12th, 2020. Like there's a lot of news circulating about new variants and new guidelines from the CDC, and now Yale's starting to send out emails about new regulations that are going to be placed on students that are returning to campus. There's a possibility that there's going to be additional tests. Like there's already going to be additional testing. I'm not entirely sure, like even for fully vaccinated people, because we are required to be fully vaccinated in order to return to campus. I'm feeling like it's this weird, I want to be excited and I want to feel like ready to go back to campus, but I also feel like it's this kind of holding period where I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. And so I have like mixed emotions about it. Also, I did community college entirely online. I did a couple classes, like evening classes, but I've had online school experience. I had not had an entire life online experience. And so I thought when we went online for school, I was like, well, I've done this before. Like I know how to take classes online. I know how to learn from an online environment, but I had not done online grad school, and online grad school is not what I signed up for. I mean, I don't think, like, obviously none of us signed up for this and we hate it. I mean, I think most of us hate it anyway. But what's frustrating to me is that I only have one more semester of coursework. And if anything gets like messed up, I don't entirely know what I'm going to do, because the quality of the work that I produce right now is so imperative to my ability to publish in my third year. Like the papers that I'm writing right now should be quality enough for me to begin thinking about getting those pieces published. And right now, the way that the online setup has been working, I'm not creating the quality of work that I would want in order to be making progress in the way that I want to. So I have like very mixed emotions about it, but I'm trying to maintain optimism and hope that we will return to campus and that people will get it together and get vaccinated, but we will see. What about you, Katie?
Yeah, I apologize for my voice. I'm just coming back from the wildfires in Northern California on my job, so I'm just a little hoarse. But in terms of being on camp or not to being on campus in the last year, I finished up my community college education online, which really wasn't that big of a deal. I have some friends at community college that I really cared about, but I'd done online school at community college as well. And so I felt like while it was kind of a non-event, I was still happy to be done with it. But then being a brand new transfer student at a big university like UC Berkeley has, I think, like an extra layer of difficulty, because not only are you like kind of suffering culture shock or transfer shock when you're coming into this new university, you're also having to learn how to navigate that while not being able to interact with people the way we normally do. So there was a lot of that for me, where I was coming into these classrooms not certain of where, I guess, my place in the culture was, or how to interact with my fellow students, or what types of interaction were appropriate between students and professors. So it was very odd learning to navigate that. And I still am not sure that I ever really figured out how to do it. I do know that I think my first year at Berkeley was, I think, suffered in a way because I wasn't able to do the things that I like to do, like dropping into professors' office hours. Now we had to schedule them, which didn't always work with my schedule, or finding the extracurricular activities that, the anthropology club put on, or even just getting to know the people in my anthropology club. And especially as a transfer student, I only get 2 years. So half of my education at Berkeley is already done. It's been online, it's gone, there's no getting it back. I definitely did try to do things that I thought would still make it a worthy experience by doing things like moving to Berkeley, getting my own apartment there, really trying to integrate into that, the city and that culture before going back to in person, so it wouldn't be as big of a shock when we go back into person. But something I didn't know when I did that was that I had undiagnosed ADHD at the time, which has been a huge struggle for me in terms of my education, because I am so used to compensating by like overfilling my schedule and constantly being out of the house and not having any option but to have structure and routine in my day. So when the pandemic came along and I moved into an apartment and I started living completely by myself for the first time, like my entire routine, toppled over. I was falling behind in school. I was really struggling because I just didn't know. It took me until this summer to get an official diagnosis. So this entire time I've just been kind of wondering what's been wrong with me. Why is it so hard to do school when I've done school totally fine previously? And the answer was undiagnosed ADHD and the pandemic, and the way that the pandemic kind of forces you out of a structure. Yeah. So I had a very difficult last semester, my spring semester at Berkeley because of that. And I don't think I would have ever, I think it's bittersweet because I don't think I would have ever struggled that much had things been in person, but I also don't think I would have gotten diagnosed if things had been not in person. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it seems like, we're kind of all in the same place, that we're in this like excitement, but like, I hate to use this because it sounds very dramatic, but like this like feeling of existential dread because you almost like know what's coming, even though like we don't know what's coming. And then there's a lot of feelings. I know like research is even showing, since we are a bunch of academics here, research is showing like how angry people are that have been vaccinated, that things aren't going back to normal, and just feeling almost like at a loss, and just how much of a struggle it is. So if anyone out there is feeling, like there's feeling excited, feeling anxious, feeling scared of the unknown, like know that you aren't alone and that it's normal to feel those things, and it's very valid to feel those things. I'm curious, if there's anyone on YouTube or things like that, I'm curious how everyone else is feeling. I'm not sure if there's anyone on currently.
Yeah, so we can't see who's currently logged on, but please feel free to drop a comment throughout today's presentation or throughout today's chat if you have anything that you would also like to add.
Yeah.
But I don't know, the kind of like overwhelming feeling of, I don't know, like a week ago, I was really excited to return to campus, and I felt like very, very optimistic about how things were going because Yale itself had dropped the mask requirement for those that could prove that they were vaccinated. And now we're back in a place where kind of lockdown-esque procedures are coming back.
Yep.
And it's just really confusing, but also really frustrating. And I think we just got a comment. My whole senior year of undergrad was online, so it was a bummer. Besides one in-person class, I hated the material, or one class I hated the material. That I had a very difficult experience like with my first year in my PhD because I thought the spring semester was going to be perfect for me because I was taking classes that were so very much in my research area. And I just wasn't resonating with the material because I am somebody who, and I think we're all a little bit this way, I need to be able to talk about those ideas out loud. I need to be able to interact with others. And a lot of that was lost. I felt like I wasn't participating in the way that I normally would. And it was just really frustrating on a variety of levels. But also I had never, like I was staying with Danielle during finals week, and
We were talking about this last night.
Yeah, it was really frustrating for me because I'm used to writing under pressure, but even the pressure of finals, I couldn't produce the type of work that I was used to.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that to be the most frustrating because I'm so reliant on knowing my patterns of being able to produce certain types of work or certain quality. And it just wasn't like the systems that I are usually fail proof kind of fell apart.
And I think there's this aspect of difficulty that the pandemic has definitely brought out these disparities. Sorry, Moo is insisting on attention this whole time. Like she's nudging my hand. But it really brought to light so many of these glaring issues, I feel like, in society as a whole, but then also within the academy. For anyone who's listening, like at any level, transfer student, community college student, undergrad, grad student, junior faculty member, post tenure faculty member, you name it, that there is this expectation that academia is is just marked by a lot of very high expectations and constantly producing and always almost competing with yourself and your other colleagues in the academy to continue producing. And so we were getting these messages from so many people, like society as a whole, that you're in a pandemic, you should just be focusing on living and staying healthy, but then also holding the fact that we're supposed to be productive because we have grades that we need to maintain in our GPAs, or we are working towards tenure and we need to get published. And it was just like this hard disparity to hold in. I feel like for me to hold both of those, like hold space for both of those in my hands. Not to mention, all of us here do not have children, and things like that. And those responsibilities that were by far increased by people who their kids now were staying at home and having to do all of these things. So I think it's just been this interesting dynamic that's been going on where I think a lot of us feel like we've lost a part of the experience and what things are supposed to be like. Like I tell people all the time, like, I'm never going to get my first year of being a professor back. Like that is gone. It's never going to happen. Katie, you're never going to get your first year at Berkeley back. Kaelyn, you're never going to get your first year of your PhD back. Christian, you're not going to get your last year of your undergrad back. And that's something that's really hard to sit with. But as much as I feel like it's important to share these like really raw and vulnerable feelings, I think we're going to try to switch it a little bit and try to remain optimistic, cautiously optimistic that we're all going to go back and talk about some of the tips that we have for integrating back into campus, particularly if you are, even if you're excited, because I think these tips are going to apply to everyone, but definitely for those who might be also holding fears or holding some feelings of anxiety, so on and so forth. So I wanted to just like give this caveat first, and it relates to this first tip of taking your time. That's the first big one, but I want to comment on the fact, I can't help it. As an applied social scientist, I take it back to research. There's a lot of research coming out right now, even from my own colleagues that are studying the impact of the pandemic on our social structures and how we interact as social people. And what we're finding is that people who are even the most extroverted people are finding integrating back into society almost like getting hit by a train. People are reporting that they're feeling just exhausted so much sooner, that they're tired, that they're almost feeling overwhelmed and anxious, and you name it. It's just like, I ask myself all the time, my husband and I will go out and do something, grocery shopping, for example, we'll come back and we're like, how did we do this plus everything else we did in a day before? Yeah. So I want to comment that the research is showing that. And so the first big tip that I'm going to give is to take your time and to know that if you are feeling tired, no matter how excited you are, you go to one day on campus and you feel like you have to crash on the couch when you get home, that's normal, that's valid, and it's almost expected.
Yeah. If I could comment on that real quick. Yes. I did have, I think, a relatively unique experience this summer where I was, working that job, and that job requires us to be in person. If anybody listening doesn't know, I was working as a seasonal archaeological technician. So I was working in the field with a crew everybody on my crew was vaccinated and we were only working with each other. We weren't working with anybody else. And the only time that we interacted with anybody else was to get groceries. So I went from being alone in a studio apartment in a big city like Berkeley, where I tried to interact with people as little as possible, to being in a crew of like 5 people for 10 hours a day, 4 days a week, and then also living with one of my crew members. So from experience, that was it was a little bit of like a whiplash. It was a little bit of shock. It was really exhausting having to socialize again the way that we've always socialized. And I didn't realize it was going to be that way. And I definitely also had that like, okay, well, now we've done orientation and I've had to socialize. I've had to tell everybody my life story all over again. And now I really just need to lay here and decompress, even though I've been like talking to people for a couple of hours when I used to socialize all day.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
I think your tip is really helpful, Katie, because I don't know if you saw, we have a comment in the chat right now, and they say that I'm going into my illegal research master's degree. This person lives in the Netherlands and they're nervous for it starting in person. There's only 17 students in their cohort, but their comfort zone shrink down to their apartment over the past year, and tips for trying to break out of that comfort zone. So I think the one that taking your time tip really applies here. And then what Katie was saying, that, it's just that easing your way into things, because our comfort zones did become a very small area, at least those of us who were doing what we were supposed to. Yeah. And knowing that you're having to step out of your comfort zone again, which makes you uncomfortable, and that's okay. And so Kaelyn, I don't know if you have any comments or if you wanted to do the next tip.
Yeah, so I wanted to do the next one. So there's 2 that we have that I wanted to discuss. So one is actually finding community. So finding people either within your cohort or within your kind of the wider community that you can connect with. One thing that was really helpful for me integrating back into just general society was that I knew everybody in my cohort was vaccinated. And so I began being able to actually see them. And we began with like doing like outdoor activities, grabbing lunch, and then slowly, like once we all felt comfortable, like being able to do like actual dinner parties and that kind of thing. So that was really helpful for me, being able to have a community that I knew for a fact was all vaccinated, and 2, that we all had things in common. And that we're also going through the exact same experience that I was. Like, we were all in the first year cohort, we're all studying history, and we all had similar classes. And so having a community that also was going through the same thing that I was in a very similar way was also really important. And then the other thing that I found when I went from online school and community college and I went to UCLA, I was used to working full time and then doing online community college. And one tip that I found that was really useful for me was that when I went back to campus, especially on the days when I'd have to be on campus practically all day, is actually finding quiet spaces on campus. So as Katie was talking about, like finding ways to decompress, find places like spaces on campus where you can decompress also, as you begin like slowly developing a kind of system for having so much social interaction, because our comfort zone at the moment is home. And trying to also find comfort in other spaces as we begin to slowly integrate is another thing that I would recommend. For me, like I used to go lay out on the lawn, like in front of Royce at UCLA, or like I would go take a nap in the library. So trying to find like spaces where you feel safe and feel comforted that are not just home. Is another thing that I would recommend that you start kind of integrating into your general routine, because if we continue to use home as like our only place of comfort, then it's really difficult to then, for example, have to be in classes all day. Like I know that for me, I have classes on Monday, this coming semester from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And so like having spaces on campus where I can like go and shut down for a minute is important. And it's going to be important as we begin to kind of like fill our schedules again.
And I just want to make one comment, because there's a comment in the chat from someone who's an essential worker who's had to work the whole time. And thank you for being willing to make that sacrifice as an essential worker. I want to make sure to comment on that, because there's a lot of us who were not in that position. Like those of us, we weren't necessarily essential workers. So thank you for being willing to do that. And it is comforting to hear stories of what this person was saying, that, you know, they didn't really feel fear. No one's gotten sick as they've gotten eased back into society. And I think that is definitely some of the fears, right? That I think everyone has a fear of getting sick. But I also want to say, if there's anyone out there that is afraid of getting COVID-19, that your fears are valid, one. And then two, I think the other part that we're trying to get to also is that these fears aren't just about getting sick. I think at this point, everyone here, you know, that are the three of us, we're all vaccinated and we trust science. And, you know, it's not perfect, but we have to get back into society. But I think more so what we're talking about is just our entire social structure and our social norms changed over the last year. We went from being just in society and around people all the time to being back in a little bubble at home. And we're now getting, like Katie had used the term, whiplashed back into society of not having that bubble. So I just want to make sure to comment on that it's not like, I really appreciate the reassurance. And it's always great to hear people who aren't getting sick. You know, there's stories on the other hand that we could all tell about people who have. But I think it all goes beyond just like the mental exhaustion of our social norms and our social structure changing so quickly and almost expecting to be okay because we're quote unquote going back to normalcy. What is normal? So I just wanted to comment on that quickly.
Yeah, of course. Is there anything you wanted to add, Katie?
Not to that comment, but I did actually have another comment for taking your time. It's something that I've had to consider being a senior on campus for the first time and thinking about, you know, it was really easy for me to have a lot of classes when my commute was 30 seconds between classes and I had to click another link. But now I'm going to be walking all the way across campus from class to class. So not only being emotionally and mentally worn out, but maybe a little bit physically worn out too. And then also taking into consideration the fact that we are going to be doing classes in person. So if this is your first time being on your new campus in person, it might be prudent to take less units, you know, because I'm considering possibly dropping a class or, you know, cutting an extracurricular activity or not doing a research unit just because I'm a little concerned about the physical activity of walking across campus and just the fact that I'm going to be in person in classes learning all day in like 4 or 5 different classes.
Yeah, absolutely. And Katie, something that you said just kind of leads really nicely into the next tip that we have about establishing a routine now. You know, like I said, we're in the Sunday of the summer and that it's approaching the academic year. And you get the Sunday scaries, as people like to say. But trying to start establishing a routine even early on now helps. You know, like we are creatures of habit, and having like starting to build those habits back is really important. Like even just, you know, Katie mentioned like having a 30-second transition from clicking on one Zoom link to the other. I made a comment to one of my colleagues the other day. It was like, I've got to figure out how to get like ready and look like a human every single day again, plus commuting, then going to class. And some of my classes that I teach are at 8 a.m. And it's not that I have a problem getting up early. It's just readjusting my brain to that. So starting to establish the routine now is really helpful and doing it slowly. So like, yeah. I know Kaelyn and I have talked about like, even this morning, you know, I'm staying here in New Haven. It's a Sunday. My alarm went off at 7 and it went off at 7 on purpose to just kind of get my brain back into this routine of waking up early and starting to function at early hours. I don't know if you have anything to add or do, Katie.
One thing that I've been trying to do a lot recently is using the month of August, and I started this in July too, when I got back to New Haven, was using this as a time to reestablish my schooling routine. So for example, like I get up at 6:30 and I make myself like go for a long walk around campus and making myself go to campus multiple times a day because that's what's going to have to happen during the school year. And luckily, like I have my dog, so I could just take her for walks. But also trying to find times that, I actually feel like I have the opposite experience. Like I went to New York the other day and I got up at 6:30. I did my routine in the morning and then I was out all day. I worked all day long. I worked in different coffee shops. It kind of felt like a day that I was going to school, like commuted into the city. I worked at a coffee shop. I read for 3 hours and then I went to a meeting. And I actually felt so much more energized being in those spaces. And so I feel like for me, it's actually the opposite.
Yeah.
In that, like, I feel a lot, I actually felt like I didn't need as much rest having been around people, which is funny because I used to think I was so introverted. And now I actually feel like I'm a lot more extroverted than I ever gave myself credit for. And so now what I'm trying to do is like actually put like schedule activities that are outside or with people. So that way I have to kind of establish those social muscles again. But also, like, I just think setting up a routine and making yourself get out of your space, and also scheduling things with people, scheduling things like where today, like you're going to go study at a coffee shop, like wear a mask again, like be safe, but try to reintegrate into your old routines of studying outside, outside of your apartment in order to establish those habits again.
Yeah, absolutely. No, for sure. I don't know, Katie, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I think she might be frozen.
I think.
Oh, wait, there you go.
There you are.
I'm sorry, it broke up for a second. Is there anything I want to add?
Yeah.
Hi.
Is there anything you want to add?
Well, I was going to say, well, I have just real quick, I feel like I have to mention it. I do have ADHD, so routines can be a little bit difficult for me. But that being said, I did find myself when I moved to Berkeley, doing things like going to campus, getting familiar with the way campus looked, walking around and visiting the buildings. I took my laptop out to the Memorial Glade so I could sit there and listen to lecture outside. I also walked up and down the streets in my neighborhood so I could get more familiar with them and knew like what kinds of shops were around where I could get lunch. And then, like Kaelyn said, like setting your alarm, or Kaelyn and Danielle setting your alarm for the same time every day in the mornings. I had a lot of practice with that this summer because I had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning for my job, and I'm trying to still maintain that routine, even though it's a lot easier to lay in bed when you don't actually have to be anywhere. But yeah, I think that's been really helpful just in keeping my brain kind of in work mode and in the kind of headspace that you need to be in order to get up and get going when you have a place to be at. So I've definitely done some of those things, maybe accidentally, but they have been helpful in retrospect.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think also like one thing, so I'm somebody that also I'm usually a morning person, but with the pandemic and with being alone in my apartment, even when I'd set an alarm, I would still lay in bed for another 30 minutes to an hour. And now I'm trying to change that routine where like I have to get up and do something right as I have to get up and actually go somewhere. And one thing that's helpful is like if like I schedule I'll make sure I take my dog for a long walk around campus, like I said. So I have to get moving. And that's another thing that it doesn't have to be exercise. It doesn't have to be working out. It can be as simple as like, just go stand outside for like 5 minutes, or like go for a little walk, or anything that actually gets you out of your apartment space or your house or your room. Because if I stay in my apartment, I had the hardest time with it before, because even if I get up 2 hours later, I'd be exhausted and I just want to go back to bed. But now if I'm like, okay, like go out into New Haven, like go walk around. And that has definitely helped kind of get me out of bed, and saying like the second I have the alarm go off, like I'm not allowed to lay in bed. Like I have to just get up. Has been another thing that's been really helpful. And even if I need to take a power nap in the middle of the day, like if I'm feeling really worn out, I don't feel as bad about it because I got a lot of work done in the morning. But regardless, I think like having a routine where you are getting up in the morning and trying to get yourself out of your space is another thing that I'm finding to be very helpful. And like I said, like I actually find it a lot more energizing if I'm like working out of my apartment now. So trying to set up like, if I don't have calls, if I'm just going to be working on my computer, if I'm just going to be doing reading, trying to not do that in my apartment, trying to do that somewhere else, because it's become very comfortable having that routine in my apartment and having like sitting on my couch and doing my reading. But I'm not kidding you, like 4 times more reading done the other day being in a coffee shop than I have in my apartment in a year and a half. So
yeah, the one and only time I was able to go to a Starbucks while I was on my job, because our Wi-Fi went out, our power went out, our running water went out. I got so much work done, more work than I'd gotten done, like in terms of like my private work, not work related, than I'd done all summer. But kind of tangentially related, something I experienced from this job was, we were out in the field physically working every single day, like walking a couple kilometers a day. And at the end of the day, I was tired, but I also wasn't. It's kind of like that fatigued, exhausted feeling that I am when I work from home, because we worked from home for the last week while we were finishing updating site records and things, like just doing our paperwork. And I was just fatigued and exhausted and tired. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to do anything. So like Kaelyn was saying, getting up and getting your body moving, oddly enough, made me less tired throughout the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's a good question in the chat. Someone who's going to school part-time for their master's, and most of their stuff's going to be online. And so any recommendations for connecting with their cohort, knowing that they can't connect in person, because that's how it's structured. And mine would be to, as much as we probably would never would never want to see another Zoom link again, which is ironic because we're on a Zoom link right now, don't be afraid to reach out to people and to hang out over Zoom, like informal meetings over Zoom with your cohort mates, I think is going to be really helpful. Just trying to connect with them in any way that you can. Something that Kaelyn and I do a lot, and then Kaelyn and I do too, is working together over Zoom, co-working and just having the Zoom link going on. So maybe you could do that with some of your cohort mates as well. There's just something comforting about knowing that somebody else is there. Yeah. That is really, really helpful. So that would be my few tips.
Yeah. Also, the one thing that saved me and my grades this last semester was the accountability workshops, and having those as part of my routine. Like, they're offered 3 or 4 times a week, and getting to work, like, even though nobody else was at Yale and nobody else was necessarily studying, well, there was a couple of people that are in Accepted Society that study history, but having people that were also working at the same time that were interested similarly in academic work, I think was also very useful for me. And having that as something that was scheduled, like every Tuesday, every Wednesday, that I would do that for 3 hours and get to co-work with people. And also, like, it's not just about the working, it's about having, like, building a community that's not even within your cohort, because I love the people that are in my program. But sometimes with your cohort, it's kind of, at least this is my experience, like, I find it a little bit difficult to be entirely yourself, because it's almost like they're your coworkers essentially. Yeah. And so it's slightly different. I felt different about it in undergrad than I do in grad school, about how your cohort is situated, but trying to find, you have to essentially, like, put yourself out there. One thing I really learned in this online environment is that nothing is going to be done for you. Like, you have to be the one to reach out. You have to be the one to send that email, set up that Facebook group, send the message. Like, no one's going to do it. Like, you're really lucky if there's somebody in your group that's, like, really extroverted and is willing to do that. But oftentimes you've got to take the initiative, and it's really hard. And it feels like kind of uncomfortable when you first do it. But I'm telling you, everybody's feeling the same way. They're just waiting for somebody else to reach out. And so be that person.
Yep. Yeah. The only way that I made friends the last 2 semesters was by cold messaging people. If I was in a Zoom meeting or in a lecture and somebody said something that I found interesting or piggybacked off of something that I said and I liked their personality, I just cold messaged them in Zoom right then and there. And I also set up study groups, like class-specific study groups, where and I found that super helpful, because not only are you getting to interact with your cohort, but I also had the ability to then go over the lecture material again and discuss our readings together. So it's kind of, it served the purpose that study groups often serve on a college campus, where you're both getting to socialize and interact with people, and then also go over your material.
And then my last tip in terms of that too, before we have our last 2 tips before the hour ends, it's that also, because this person who asked the question is in grad school, and we're on social media right now through YouTube, but there's a really big academic community on social media in your field, in different fields. That's how the 3 of us met, and we're super close friends now. And so don't be afraid to reach out to people on social media too. Like, you know, some people outside of your cohort. That's the other thing I would say. I mean, that's the whole point of social media, is being social, right? And I think I've found that the academic community on social media is some of the friendliest people that I've met.
I mean, Danielle like cold message slid into my
did.
DMs. And now we're best friends. So social media, and also like, I mean, just another shameless plug, like check out Accepted Society.
Yeah, exactly. And then, so I would be remiss if I didn't mention the other two like tips were that lean on others as needed, which we've been talking about. Know that if you find yourself excited and not afraid or scared or anxious at all, and other people are, know that that's valid and there's someone else who's feeling that. If you're terrified, know that that's valid and there's someone else who's feeling that. Anxious, insert other emotion here. Leaning on others and helping to be in community about it, I think helps and takes some of the power away, knowing that there are other people out there that are feeling the same way as you. And then I would also be remiss if I didn't mention that if you just really find yourself struggling, therapy. I always say therapy. This is an adjustment. It's a life change. You know, most of us are going to university institutions, there's usually therapy-based resources there. Things like BetterHelp exist, which you can do financial aid through them, and they're cheaper overall compared to some therapy.
Yeah, if you need a BetterHelp link, message me because I have a discount code.
Exactly. So and I was using BetterHelp, not sponsored at all. So, you know, don't be afraid to use therapy and other things like that too, as needed.
Absolutely. And also my one other tip with therapy, sign up early, like sign up if you need it, because I ran into a big problem with like my insurance through Yale, where all the therapists within the network, a lot of people were going back to therapy, which is good.
Yes.
But then they had no availability. So make sure you get in before the semester starts, just so you're covered before people's calendars fill up.
Yeah, therapy doesn't have to be a crisis intervention. No. And it shouldn't be just a crisis intervention. It's great for crisis, but especially to know, like anyone who hasn't been in therapy, it's usually a few weeks for an appointment, then you have an intake appointment, and then it's another like week or two until you get in with someone else, unless you're in an absolute crisis. So getting in before you think you need it, even if you go in and you tell that therapist, I think I might have trouble adjusting, or I just know that I have going to have feelings about adjustment, but I don't know what to talk about now. Most therapists will be like totally okay with that and have something else to talk to you about.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
Kind of in relation to therapy, real quick, the last thing I would say is to do your best to advocate for yourself, which is something I've had to do a lot this last semester. So, you know, like disability services, you know, take advantage of those if you can. If you feel like you need a diagnosis, that will help you get services on campus, advocate for yourself for that as much as you can, because that's really been what's been the most helpful for me. My GSIs have made accommodations for me. I have official accommodations through school now because I've had the ability to get diagnosed, but it took a lot of self-advocating.
And know that if your first therapist that you match with, you don't vibe with them, that's okay. It's kind of like going on a first date, and it's okay to switch between people. It's not personal for the therapist most of the time. You know what I mean? So that it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, we have another meeting that we are heading off to in just a minute. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up today's session. If anybody has any additional comments, please feel free to leave them on the YouTube chat. Thank you all so much for joining today. Thank you to Danielle and to Katie for joining in on this conversation. If you would like to be part of this conversation next time and have a private conversation with us after these meetings, please feel free to join Accepted Society and join us for these conversations and planning sessions, as well as mentor calls. So if you have any questions, please feel free to email us. Thank you all so much.
And to everyone in the chat, good luck. You know, we're all in this together.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you all. See you next time.
Bye.